Hello, church. Yes, this is a sanctuary that we've all been missing, so I thought I would share the thoughts for the day from here. Because this Sunday we're starting a sermon series called Choosing Joy, encouraging all of us to choose joy, and we're going to be looking at Paul's letter to the church in Philippi. It's called the Epistle of Joy. Now, we're going to take a chapter a week, and so I would encourage you to read chapter 1 of Philippians for this week to be prepared. And then twice on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm going to share thoughts with you about the upcoming chapter. So the first Philippians, the first chapter, has two major themes. I've already spoken on the one about how love will grow. And the second theme is this: you can't imprison the gospel. Now, Paul is in jail when he writes this letter to the church that he loves, and basically what he's trying to do is to interpret his chains, because the Christians in that day thought that there was some direct correlation between the kind of person you were, your character, and then what was happening to you, which meant that they thought Paul was amazing. He was their friend and mentor, and yet what was he doing in jail? So Paul is trying to answer that big question for them. And but he does remind them, and this whole story reminds us, that being a Christian does not spare us from facing hardships. And Paul wants to teach them that. And what he teaches are two main things about the fact they can't imprison chains. He says God always brings good out of bad. He always brings life out of death. And he wants them to understand that pain, injustice, suffering, even death can be endured if we can make sense out of it, at least some kind of sense. It's been said that no tragedy is so heavy as one without meaning. So Paul's trying to give meaning to what is happening here. And he does so by explaining in very joyful terms. He uses the word joy, enjoy, rejoice a lot. He's trying to explain to him that God will make good on God's promise, that God will wrestle good even out of the worst of circumstances. And he explains two ways that is happening in verses 12 through 14 of the first chapter. And let me say in his own words what the first point is that he's trying to make. He writes this: I want to report to you, friends, that my imprisonment here has had the opposite effect of its intended effect. Instead of being squelched, the message has actually prospered. All the soldiers here, and everyone else too, found out that I'm in jail because of this Messiah that piqued their curiosity. And now they've learned all about him. Here he is in jail, speaking to people he never would have had the opportunity to if he had not been chained up and confined. But then he talks about the second good that comes out of his imprisonment. And it is this, again in his own words: not only that, but most of the followers of Jesus here have become far more sure of themselves in the faith than ever, speaking out fearlessly about God and about the Messiah. Then Paul says something very intimate to the people. Again, he says this: through your faithful prayers and the generous response of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, everything he wants to do in and through me will be done. He's grateful for the prayers of his friends and a deep trust that God will pull him through. You see, Paul is in prison, unable to be near the ones that he loves. His only means of communication is by letter, which, talk about snail mail, it would take months for him. He had every reason to feel alone, because he was, and disempowered. I mean, what power do you have when you're in prison? And depressed, and yet, instead, he is able to name specifically how God is bringing good out of the worst that could happen to him. God used his chains, his confinement, the disability that was brought on by all of this to further the gospel. I hope you can connect the dots between Paul's message and our situation today. God will bring good out of all this, out of the pandemic, out of the social unrest. We have to trust, but we need to be praying for one another, that we would be empowered by the same faith as Paul had to be strong. So the question, I guess, for you and for me, there's several questions. Will we let God, allow God to work in us and through us during these times? And will we be brought down by our hardships? And granted, there are times that we feel down. But will we ultimately be lifted up in the knowledge that God is with us and for us, and that God does stuff like this all the time? You see, like those first century Philippians, we have to ask, will we come out stronger as they did? More determined, more sure of our faith because of the love and compassion of God? I hope your answer is a resounding yes. It's good to be with you in our sanctuary.